Now, one thing I want to tell you is this. If you think about falling, guess what's gonna happen? You're gonna fall. I don't want you to think about falling. What I want you to think about is I want you to think about the mechanics. So we already know what those mechanics are. We're gonna go over it one more time. Super easy, right? So first thing, we're gonna start the bike up, right? We already know how to start our bike up. If you didn't, you wouldn't be watching this. Okay, bike started, we're in first gear. First thing we're gonna do is release the front brake. So check this right here. So I'm gonna release that front brake because my bike's aiming uphill. I got my rear brake engaged with my right foot. I'm gonna release it just enough to where that bike wants to slip back. I'm gonna come off of the throttle. Come around here, my man. I'm gonna come off the throttle just to hit the friction zone, right? And we all know that when we hit the friction zone on our bike, what it sounds like. It sounds like that, like the bike's gonna die. Once that happens, if you come around, I'm gonna give it some throttle. So once I hit that friction zone, I'm gonna give it some throttle. When I do that, because the brake is barely pressed, you're gonna see the bike want to take off. See that? So all I'm gonna do is dump those mechanics and then take off like this. So one of the scariest things for a new rider is starting the bike on an uphill with no momentum. We all have been there, thinking about stalling and falling, right? And if we don't go out and practice this skill and master this skill, we can ride our motorcycle with fear and anxiety in the back of our minds. So how do we begin to master getting the bike uphill from a standstill? And for a quick plug, I didn't learn this in the MSF course. So when I found myself on the streets, I did stall. And and there were cars behind me, but thankfully, they were pretty patient with me. So today, let's attack this. There's really only 3 points that I want to make with this video. But before we get into those 3 points, the first thing I think we need to address is we usually think about the physical mechanics of accomplishing something on a motorcycle as a beginner rider. But I think it's the proper mindset that we need to have before we begin to manage the proper mechanics. So I want to talk about the 4 key things you need to have in your mind, the 4 elements of what I would call a good mindset for going uphill and practicing uphill. And the first thing is, number 1, it's okay to stall your bike. You're gonna practice, you're not a master at it, you didn't come out like a street Rossi, right? So you're gonna stall your bike during this practice, that's okay. Don't get down on yourself, and if you haven't practiced this yet, but you're constantly thinking that you're gonna stall, don't let that stop you from mastering this technique so that when you ride, you're not riding around with anxiety. Number 2, if you do stall your bike, when you do stall your bike, I would encourage you to get in the habit of always putting the same foot down. My recommendation would be put the left foot down. That's the foot on the side of the kickstand. My reasoning behind that is this. If you're on the uphill and you put the left foot down, that gives you the ability to squeeze the front brake with the right hand and the rear brake with the right leg. Also, you're gonna see that if you get in the habit of putting the left foot down, it's just gonna make it easier to constantly start off uphill, because as you're gonna see when I show you how to start uphill, we're gonna need that right foot on the rear brake. So just always put the left foot down. If you do stall, get in the habit of doing that. That's also one less thing you gotta think about when the bike stalls, which reduces the probability of you overthinking the situation during stalling and start falling like an Alicia Keys song. Okay. The third thing for the mindset is make sure that you are already familiar with what the friction zone is and how it works, but more so, more familiar with your bike's friction zone. The way your friction zone is gonna work on my bike is gonna be different than your bike. I would say even if we have the same bike, because we've been riding the bikes different, so the way my clutch will respond is probably gonna be different than the way your clutch will respond. So if you haven't practiced your friction zone and got familiar with your friction zone or the friction zone at all, before you attempt to do this, I would encourage you to go to a flat space and practice the friction zone. But Be familiar with that mentally and physically. And the fourth thing for the mindset we need to be in before we practice this is it's okay to slip your clutch. Now, some people are going to say, oh my, that is the worst. Don't listen to this guy. They're going to say they're going to unsubscribe and they're never going to listen to me again. Kind of like the one guy who said that I didn't know that was a break, so he's never going to listen to me again. Whatever. But my argument for that is it's better to slip your clutch while you practice and master going uphill so that you can have more enjoyable rides, not have to constantly think about, I hope I don't come up to a hill that I don't know as I explore my city or my town, because remember, riding is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be relaxing. So if you got this little thing that's hanging you up in the back of your mind, or it's preventing you from riding as much, this is probably your first bike. It's not your last bike. Slip the clutch a little bit. It's okay, as long as you're not burning the clutch. So those are the 4 things that I would say that's the mindset we want to be in. Real quick recap on the mindset. Number 1, it's okay to stall the bike. Number 2, if you do stall the bike, put the same foot down, preferably the left. Number 3, it is okay to slip that clutch. And number 4, they're not in the same order, but number 4, make sure that you're already familiar with your bike's friction zone and how that works. Okay, so first point. Here's the first point of going uphill. The mechanics of going uphill are very similar to the mechanics of starting your bike on a flat ground. So let's just compare the two. When we start our bike on a flat ground, what do? Let's just imagine we're already in first gear and the clutch is open. We know this is what we're gonna do. Step number 1, we're not gonna have any brakes, right? So no hands are on the right hand is off the brake, left foot is off the brake, right? Number 2, we're gonna slowly release that clutch into the friction zone while simultaneously giving it some gas. Once we get that momentum, step number 4, we're gonna slowly release all the way off that clutch and begin shifting. Starting uphill is very similar. Here's how it's gonna work. When you're uphill, here's what you're gonna do. Step number 1, you're only gonna release the right hand brake, okay? You're gonna keep the rear brake engaged, not tight, just enough to keep your bike from sliding backwards downhill. So step number 1, take that right hand off the front brake, engage with just enough pressure on the rear brake to keep the bike from sliding back. Step number 2, slowly release the bike's clutch into the friction zone. As you begin to give it some gas, you're gonna feel the bike bite down. You're gonna feel it like sit down, because remember, that brake is engaged just enough to keep you from sliding back. So
it's on the brake, the bike wanna move. All I'm gonna do is start just like I would on a flat hill, doing those mechanics, and then I'm gonna take off.
as you engage with step number 2, which is slowly releasing that bike into the friction zone while simultaneously giving it some gas, you're gonna feel that bike, boom, bite down. Step number 3, when that bike bites down, release that rear brake, increase that throttle while simultaneously opening up that clutch or releasing that clutch all the way. That's it. It's that simple, my friends. That's all you have to do. So easy, right? That's point number 1. Point number 2 would be, don't focus on the heel, right? Focus on the mechanics that we just went over. I opened this video up with mindset. So here's what I'm gonna say about this point. If you're focused on, I don't know if I can do this, I don't wanna go out there and stall on my bike, I don't want my bike to fall, I'm a new rider, if I get on my bike, I'm gonna screw this up. If you allow that to stop you, you allow that mental roadblock to become a physical roadblock to getting out here and practicing, 2 things are gonna happen. 1, you're never gonna practice and you're not gonna master it. Number 2, you're gonna be scared when you ride because you haven't done this, right? But number 2 is gonna be, if you focus on falling and messing up, that's what you're gonna do. So what I would encourage you to do when you go out there, think about the mechanics that we just went over. And what I'm saying, it sounds so simple, but I believe it's so powerful. Let me give you a quick story of why what you think about is so powerful. When I was in the Marine Corps, right? And they teach you how to shoot, right? And they teach you how to aim. Now, we all know that Marines are the best riflemen in the whole world. We already know that, right? But when they teach you how to shoot, right? And I was a marksmanship coach, so I think I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. But when they teach you how to shoot, they don't tell you, hey, aim for your target, look down range, aim for your target, and try really hard to hit it. That's not what they tell you. That's not what you're supposed to think about. What you're supposed to think about, now I'm not going to tell you exactly what we think about. You should join if you want to figure that out. But what they tell you to think about is think about the mechanics, right? Think about the mechanics of shooting. Is your bone alignment correct, right? Is the way your eye looking at the tip as opposed to the target, is that correct? When you squeeze the trigger, are you going through the appropriate mechanisms to squeeze the trigger? If you think about that, you will hit your target. If you think about trying to hit your target or missing, you will miss, okay? I promise you. So this is the same thing for the motorcycle. If you go out there and you're focused on, oh man, I'm gonna mess this up, it's a lot of steps, you're not gonna do it right? But if you go out there and focus on, hey, what am I supposed to do? All right, boom, step number 1. Take that front hand off the front brake while making sure I got the rear brake engaged just enough not to slide back. Step number 2, open that clutch up into the friction zone while giving it some gas. Wait for that bike to bite down. Step number 3, when it bites down, let that clutch go all the way while giving it some throttle, while letting that rear brake go. Now we're on our way. Focus on those things and you'll be successful. Now, point number 3, confidence comes from practice. Now, you guys and gals have heard me say this. It's not practice that makes perfect. It's perfect practice that makes perfect, right? Here's something I would say to you. Don't go out there and practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong, all right? The confidence is gonna come from the practice. And guess what you're doing when you're practicing? You're getting seat time. Now, watch this right here. Amateurs, because this video is called Master It. It's not called Get It Right and Become an Amateur at it. We're talking about mastering it. So amateurs practice until they get it right. Masters practice until they can't get it wrong. When you decide to practice this, which one are you gonna be? Are you gonna practice until you finally get it right? Or are you gonna practice till you can't get it wrong? Now, I'll tell y'all something. When I was taking my MSF course, one of the things I had a hard time with was emergency braking. I couldn't get that bad boy 10 feet or less. Man, I took my motorcycle out probably 4 to 5 days a week. And I practiced literally like 2 hours at a time. And I'm gonna bring up a video on how to practice the emergency braking if you need to practice that for the MSF before you go. Or if you just want to get good at it. But man, I practiced that until I got it. And honestly, the first day I got it down and I was good, right? But I was like, hold up, man. You just got it right. You haven't mastered it. So I went back and just did it until I found myself thinking about my daughters and I was still doing it. I found myself, y'all know I'm kind of hefty. I found myself thinking about that next meal and I'm still braking in under 10 feet. Practice these skills until you can't get it wrong. And even when you can't get it wrong, practice it some more. So that's what I would say. And you know Steph Curry, man, whether you like him or hate him, after he win a championship, he right back to the same practice regime. So look at that for sports. Master your craft. So that's what I would say. You know, just a quick recap. You know, number 1, make sure you're in the right mindset. Number 2, the mechanics of going uphill are very similar, starting on flat ground. Number 3, you know, don't focus on the heel. Focus on the mechanics we just went over. And number 4, confidence comes from practice. Remember, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Don't practice until you get it right. That's amateur. Practice until you can't get it wrong. That's master. I'm SoCal Rider B, and I'm out. Holla.